Hey, today we're very excited to be starting Masechet Nedarim. We're going to be learning today Masechet Nedarim Daf Bet. Gemara always starts on Daf Bet. Masechet Nedarim is sponsored by Akiva and Benny Adler. We're honored to hear from last night as she finished her Siyum Shas. In honor of our mother, Lorraine Kahana, and in loving memory of our parents, Joseph Kahana Zichronah Livracha and Miriam and Ari Adler Zichronah Livracha. Today's daf is sponsored by the Agus family in honor of Akiva Adler completing her Siyum Shas. Today's daf is sponsored by Rabbi and Oliver Mitchell in honor of their daughter Ellen Mitchell Cooper on becoming the Yoetzet Halakha for Manhattan. And today's daf is sponsored by Amy Bardak in loving memory of the 11 souls who were killed in the Pittsburgh synagogue shooting 4 years ago. Yehi Zichram Baruch. Okay, with that, we're going to get started with our interesting Masechet. First major question, which I'm sure everybody is asking, why is Masechet Nedarim in Seder Nashim? What does this have to do with women? So I'll give you a few of the answers that are given, because obviously nobody really knows why it was here. We wish we could ask Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi why he did it. So one of the answers given, the most standard answer is, well, a husband can annul the wives of the vows of the wife. Nedarim is vows. The husband can annul the vows of the wife, and therefore it comes up here in the context of Nashim, because it's issues, what we call beino lebeina, between husband and wife. Even though there's much more than Nedarim, than women taking vows and their husbands annulling them, but since topic, it fits here. A little bit of a strange answer because not really about Nedarim, right? That's a one-side issue within Nedarim. Another interesting one I saw in Safrai, which I'd never heard before. Safrai claims, which Safrai is, it's a book written by two Safrai brothers. It's a commentary on the Mishna, an academic commentary on the Mishna. Called Mishnayot Eretz Yisrael. It's now found on Sefaria. I like to quote it a lot. They claim there that Nedarim were something that the rabbis viewed, now whether true or not true, but the rabbis viewed it as a woman's thing. That Talmidei Chachamim don't usually make vows, and even men don't usually take vows, and it's women who often take vows. If you remember, we had the Isha Nadranit in Masechet Ketubot, if you learned Ketubot with us, which is the woman who basically takes on a lot of vows, and her husband wants to divorce her on the grounds of that she was a woman who takes a lot of vows. And that perhaps, very interesting theory, I don't know if it's true, but that it was a woman's thing. Many more women took vows than men, even if you say, well, what's next? Nazir. Now, Nazir, you always think Nazir as a man. Well, no, he even claims, based on some historical evidence, that there were many women Nazirot also. And therefore, these go together with things that relate to women. And then the Sota comes after that. Obviously, Nazir and Sota are next to each other in the Torah. Also makes sense why they're juxtaposed to each other in the Mishnah. Also, you could say, even if you don't assume all the women or many more women were Nazirah, still neder goes with Nazir, because a Nazir is a type of vow, basically. It's a vow, like a specific vow that you're taking to be a Nazir, which then forbids all sorts of other things upon you. So that's another possible reason. As I mentioned in the Siyum last night, talked about what Rabbanit Sarna had said at the Siyum of Seder Moed, where she talked about Nashim. Nashim is the book of words. And I quoted this line that she said, which is, it's human attempts at creation with words. And it's humans' attempt to be like God by being able to create things with our words. Now, sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not good. We're going to talk about Nedarim, maybe making vows and taking upon ourselves forbidden things that weren't forbidden in the Torah. Maybe that's not a good thing, right? Maybe we shouldn't be adding more prohibitions. And in fact, there's a big deliberation among the rabbis about whether vows is a good thing or vows are bad. Okay, is it good to take upon ourselves more isurim and be creative in this way by creating more prohibitions? Or is it maybe not such a good thing? And whether it's a good thing or not, that humans are creating more things with their words, could be it's good, could be it's not good. One of the beautiful things they can create with words is marriage, for example. Marriage is done with the words. Harei at mikuneshet li. And it's a connection of the couple through words. And that's what Seder Nashim is all about. And therefore, it fits perfectly here. If you take our idea a little farther, you see that if you want to talk about a Seder having a concept of words, for example, so if you go forward to the next Seder, which is Nezikin, there it's the opposite or different. The focus there is not on words at all. In fact, we talked about this, I mentioned it, I think, of Hebrew Siyum this week, which is, or maybe even the English, I don't remember, but lav she'en bo ma'aseh is an action that's considered, it's a negative prohibition in the Torah that's not associated with an action, and you don't get lashes for it, according to most opinions. And the classic example is words, speech. If you say something, but you don't do something, that's not as significant, right? That's the opposite of this whole Masechet, where words are super important when it comes to damages, even though we all talk about these days slander, libel, all that. But in halacha, it's defined as actions. Your words are not as important as your actions are. It's what you do that's important, and certainly not your thoughts. Now, in neither of these Masechtot, just thinking about something without actually expressing it in words is not relevant. You want to marry someone, but you don't actually do anything. Of course, it's not relevant. You want to take a vow, but you don't. You think it in your head, but you don't express it in words. It's not a vow. It has to be expressed in words. First, Mishna is going to deal with what words are the words used to express a vow. But your thoughts are not really so important. They're important to a certain extent. They're important to the extent that they might help define what are the words you're using. Your thoughts might help us figure that out, but we don't go by your unique individual thoughts. This is something we're going to have to deal with a lot in the Masechet is, what did you mean when you said that? And we try to go by what the general person would have meant when they said such a statement. But the next Seder, which is Seder Kodashim, which is all about sacrifices, there it's all about the thought. I see you're writing, Miriam, about pigul. So the first Mishnah in Seder in Masechet Zvachim, which is the first one in Seder Kodashim, is all about pigul, and it starts with that because that is the central theme of korbanot. There, your thoughts are what's important. You can ruin a korban by having incorrect thoughts. If you thought that you were going to sprinkle the blood in the wrong time, like I'm slaughtering this animal, and at the same time I'm thinking I'm going to sprinkle the blood on the altar tomorrow, which is not allowed. It has to be done that day. I've ruined the korban. It's invalid. So there, it's your thoughts. So if you think about these three sterim as having themes, it's very interesting to think about these themes: words, actions, and thoughts. And these are all very important aspects, but they play a different role in different areas of halach. Okay, enough for the broad introduction. Now we're going to go into a more specific introduction to Masechet Nedarim. The first thing is, if you look at a regular daf of Gemara, I don't know what you're learning from, but if you have a regular daf of Gemara in front of you, you will see that it has a bit of a different look than the other Masechtot. Why is that? Well, Rashi is where Rashi normally belongs, but Rashi is much shorter. Generally assumed by in general, people think that this is actually not Rashi. It's somehow a commentary that got attributed to Rashi, but it's not actually Rashi. And in general, the Rashi on, as we call it, because Rashi came to mean the basic commentary you're going to use when learning something, became the Ran, Rabbeinu Nissim. Tosfot is missing here. Instead of Tosfot, we have the Ran. And the Ran is a commentary that I would sort of call it somewhat of a combination between Rashi and Tosfot. Okay, so Rashi Rashi has a more simple explaining the Pshat, which the Ran will also do, but also he goes much more in depth, like Tosfot does, comparing, bringing different opinions, deliberating. So that's the Ran, and we're going to often make references to the Ran because he is the main commentary. The Ran stands for Rabbeinu Nissim. He was from Spain, from the Spanish tradition, Ritva, the Ramban, all that. That's his school. That's technical. Now, that was a good intro, because now we're going to read the first Ran on this Masechet, even though we haven't started reading the Mishnah yet, but it's important as background. He talks about the fact that there's two categories of vows. So we've been blessed today that it's a short daf, so we have a lot of time to do a good, solid introduction. And if you haven't read Gita's introduction or listened to Ayelet's introduction, I highly recommend it. They'll do even more than I'm going to do today, but I'm going to give a bit of an intro. Neder hu, on the beginning of the Ran here, it's on the left side of your page. Neder hu be'echad mishnei nedarim. There's two types of nedarim. One, in nidrei hekdesh. Often we talk about a neder, someone vows to bring something to the temple, right? Like Yaakov Avinu takes a vow to bring to God, and Hannah takes a vow, right, to bring Shmuel to the temple, right, if she has a child. Those are the vows we normally know from the Torah, where somebody sanctifies something to God. That's makdish lebedek habayit or lemizbech. What does it mean to sanctify to God? Either for upkeep of the temple or to bring on the altar. If you take a vow about an animal, that automatically has to go and be brought as a sacrifice. So now they're going to talk about what makes those unique, different from the second category we're going to talk about. is Eino Yachol Akdish Ela Mashu Shelo. Number one, you can only sanctify something that's yours. I can't sanctify, go take your animal and say, I'm bringing this to the temple. It's not mine to bring to the temple. So if I say I'm bringing this animal to the temple, it's a meaningless action because I can only make a vow to bring something that's going to be sanctified to the temple if it belongs to me. Number two, Isuro Kolel Kolada. If I do take something that belongs to me and I sanctify it to the temple, that becomes hekdesh. We've learned many times, if you're continuing, about me'ila. Me'ila is where you misuse consecrated property, because anything that and you do it accidentally, because I didn't necessarily know that you designated this animal was going to go to the temple, right? You could just think about it in your house all the time. This happens, right? Somebody leaves something in the fridge, they plan to take it to school the next day, but they don't tell anybody they're taking it to school the next day. This happens all the time, right? In my house. And then the next morning, someone comes down, who took my food, right? You didn't label it, didn't say, right? It was an accident, but they took your food and now you have no food for school. So that's what happens with consecrated property. You might not know, but if somebody sanctifies it, it's sanctified and you're forbidden to use it. A second category, nidre isur, she'asar al atzmo dvarim hamutarim. Nidre isur is something different. And this, he's going to say right now, this is our topic in our Masechet. Our Masechet is not dealing with nidre hekdesh. Our Masechet is talking about, okay, we'll get to that when we get to kodshim. Our Masechet is talking about taking something that's permitted, like a food, let's say, and forbidding it to yourself. Now, in this case, I can even do it to your stuff. I can say your produce is going to be forbidden to me because it doesn't need to be owned by me because I'm not actually changing its status in any way. I'm not doing anything to it, only as it regards me. So since it regards me, I can do that. And what else can I do? I can actually forbid something of mine to you. So the only thing I can't do, if you remember, we learned this in Ketubot, I can't forbid something of yours to somebody else in a vow. I can't take a vow about someone else about your stuff, but I can forbid my stuff to you and your stuff to me. Now, right, so Ein Isura Shaveh L'Kol, it doesn't apply across the board to everybody. U'Masechet Zeh u'Binyan Nidrei Isur. Okay, our stuff is all talking about nidrei isur. That's what's important to understand. First, what type of vows are we talking about? That there's two types of vows, and one of them is not our topic at all. And this is where we get back to this question about, is it good to take vows or is it not good to take vows? And we're going to see different approaches. Some rabbis frowned upon vows. In general, they said, we have enough things that are forbidden to us. Right? It's hard enough to keep all the mitzvot and all the negative prohibitions. Now you're going to add more things. It's like we talked about creating with words. It's like you're trying to play God, and you shouldn't play God in this area. Right? There's certain ways where we should try to emulate God. Certain ways where we shouldn't forbid more things than God forbade to us. That's enough. Okay. Some people didn't view it as a negative thing. Okay? So there's a deliberation we're going to see later about whether this is good, whether this is not good. I want to talk about two more things, and then we'll start learning. The next thing is the difference between neder and shvuah. Okay, the difference between a vow and an oath. We're going to get to this in the Gemara today, but I thought it would be good as part of the introduction, which is a neder. This is very basic. A neder forbids an object to me. That's what we've been talking about. So the isur is on the object. It's true, it's forbidden to me, but the language is this object is forbidden to me. I'm taking a vow that this object will be forbidden to me, or all of your stuff is forbidden to me, or however I say it. A shvuah is where I forbid myself. I swear that I will not X. So it could be the same thing. I swear I'm not going to eat your fruits, or these fruits are forbidden by a vow on me. It's just that I say it differently. Now, what's the practical difference? Well, there's very important practical difference. You can't take a vow on something that's not actual. For example, I can't say, I vow not to eat. Okay, that's an oath. You can only say, I swear I am not going to eat, or I swear I'm not going to sleep today. Okay, you can't say, I swear I'm not going to sleep for more than 3 days, because one can't do that. But I could say, I swear I'm not going to sleep today. That theoretically is possible. So that would be called a shvuat shah. If I said, I'm not going to sleep for more than 3 days. That's already, so ridiculous, right? It's not possible. But I can swear on sleep, but I can't take a vow, a neder, on sleep, because that's not an actual object. It has to have an object so I could say, I could take a vow on not eating as long as I talk about the foods that I'm not eating. Okay, that's important. Another difference, oaths often happen with Shem Hashem, not always with God's name. Nedarim don't happen with the name of God. Okay, and neder won't be. A vow is just, I'm saying something's forbidden to me, but I don't use the name of God. Another thing about a neder, okay, that's just a different, right? Shvuot can be without the name of God. We've talked about this before also. The other thing about neder is there's something called hatpasa. Hatpasa is that I say something is forbidden to me and I connect it with something else that's forbidden. Like, for example, a korban, a sacrifice is forbidden to me, as we talked about. So I say this is going to be forbidden to me like a korban. That's a language of making a neder. Some people think that I can only make a neder with hatpasa, that if there's going to be a deliberation about this further on, about whether it has to be the hatpasa latpis, means to connect it to something else. Do I have to say some language that connects it? Now, this is weird because we're going to see you could say, sure, that something is forbidden to me without saying that. But those who hold that you have to have hatpasa basically say, when I say something is forbidden to me, we assume that I mean it's forbidden like something that's forbidden, that it has hatpasa built in, even though it's not said explicitly. If you don't get all this, it's fine. We're going to review it. This is just my intro. The last thing I want to talk about is this issue of the language used. And that's where our Mishnah is going to start out. So I'm going to end our intro with this and start already with our Mishnah, which is the language used. There's a big deliberation also, we're going to see in the Gemara, about is it Lashon? There's a difference between the language people use for speaking, general speaking, and then there's Lashon Torah, the language of the Torah. So in our topic, normally we have, normally things are Lashon Torah. We use Lashon Torah for many things, right? When we say things, there's certain things within our religion that we use Lashon Torah. In this case, neder, we're going to side often more with Lashon Bnei Adam, the language that people speak, because what we're trying to get at is, what did you mean by what you said? And that's going to be a lot of what we're dealing with here is, what was your intention when you said what you said? And then the question is, do we go by Lashon Torah, the way the Torah speaks, which we know is very different from the jargon that people use on the street. So, and also time passed from then, right? The language is different. The use of words is different, the way people speak. Or, right, both because it's Torah versus now and time has passed, and also because the way people speak on the street is not the way people spoke in the Torah. The Torah is written as a book. People speak differently than it's written. So there's going to be a whole debate about, do we go by Lashon Bnei Adam when it comes to a vow? Because it's really just the way people speak and what they meant by what they said. Okay, with that, we're going to get started with one last comment I'm going to say. There's a bunch of Masechtot that have a bit of a different style to them. This is one of the Masechtot that has a bit of a different style. You'll see uses of words different than in other Masechtot. Has a very unique, besides that it looks different because there's the Ran and not Tosfot. Also, the style of writing of the text of the Gemara itself is somewhat different. Okay, so you'll pay attention to that as we go on. Kol kinuyim nedarim kinedarim. So here starts our Mishnah. All kinuyim of nedarim. What's a kinui? A kinui literally means a nickname. What this means is, if I take a vow upon myself, usually you do it with the language of a neder. But what if I don't use the language of a neder? I use something similar to neder. So has the same validity. Then basically I said, something is forbidden to me using some other word. We're going to get in the next Mishnah, which we'll only get to in a bunch of days. But the next Mishnah is going to talk about what is a kinui for neder, and for all the other things we're going to see in this Mishnah. So right now, they're just giving what I call the topic sentence. This is the general idea. Later, we'll get into the details of this. Charamim kecharamim. This, by the way, highlights, by starting out with this, which maybe isn't the first place I would have started, but it highlights for us the importance of the wording used. This is where words become very important. Okay, I should really, before I go on, I should really point out the verse in the Torah, and there was one other thing I wanted to say, which is in Bereshit Lamed, Pasuk Gimel, it says, Ish ki dor neder laHashem, person who takes a vow to God. This is the source for our whole Masechet. O hishava shvua, or takes an oath. Notice neder and oath are in the verse together. We're going to get back to this soon. By the way, there's a study guide for today, so recommended to open it. You can find it on our site or on the details of the podcast. And a few lines down into the page is this pasuk. It's bolded. Le'esul isar al nafsho, to forbid something on himself or herself. Lo yachel dvaro, this is the big halacha. You cannot desecrate your word. Whatever came out of your mouth, you have to do. Here's the obligation that if you took upon yourself something that was permitted and you made it forbidden, it is effective. And what our Mishnah is telling us is not only is that effective, but if you said some language that was like a neder, it's going to be effective as well. V'charamim kecharamim. Cherem is usually in the Torah something that somebody forbids an item, like calls it cherem, it becomes sanctified to the temple. Here we obviously don't mean that, and it's one of the things the Ran says, since we're not talking about nidrei hekdesh, that can't be what it means. Here it means they use the language of cherem. Cherem nowadays is used more for excommunication. In the words of the Mishnah, that's going to be nidoi, is excommunication. Cherem is not exactly excommunication the way we understand it. Cherem is basically another language of a vow, basically. So any language that's similar to cherem, it's a nickname for cherem, will be also treated as a cherem, meaning it'll be forbidden to you if you forbade something to yourself with that language. Ushvuot kishvuot, and oaths also, use not the word shvua, but something similar to it, also will be effective. And nizirut kinizirut. If you say instead of I'm going to be a nazir, you say something similar to it, something that's also a term that's used to mean nazir, then it's also going to be effective. So we have four things here. Really only one is our topic, which is neder. Maybe you could say cherem is sort of like neder, but I said Breshit, it's Bamidbar Lamed. I hope I said Bamidbar Lamed. Anyway, okay. So those are our four categories. Gemara is immediately going to get off on a tangent about why are these four things mentioned in our Mishnah and actually compared to a different Mishnah where only one of them, and why did they mention four there, and why did they mention four here? We're going to get back there soon. Ha'omer lechavero, if you say to your friend, mudrani mimcha, mudrani milashon neder, right? I am forbidden from you. Mufrashni mimcha, I will be distanced from you. Muruchachni mimcha, also, right? Mufrashni is separated, muruchachni is distanced. Shani ochel lecha. Okay, there's different versions here. We're going to have this many times. Sha'ani or she'eni. Okay, they all mean the same thing. Ani means not. She'ani means that I will, but it really means that I won't. Okay, so either which way we read it, it means shani ochel lecha, that I won't eat anything from you. Shani to'em lecha, that I won't taste anything from you. Asur. Now, the simple reading of this Mishnah is that there's 5 different things here, 5 languages. Modrani, mufrashni, muruchachni, shani ochel lecha, shani to'em lecha. We get to Daf Dalet, we'll see that Shmuel merged these somewhat, which is there's the first 3 and there's the second 2, and they have to go together. If you want to say mudrani, it's not enough. You have to say mudrani in what way? Shani ochel lecha, shani to'em lecha. Okay, that there has to be a combination of the 2, otherwise it doesn't really make sense what you're saying. And the Gemara is going to start saying these are cut off languages because you're kind of missing something. So the question is, right, and the Gemara is actually going to call these, I'll already tell you, they're going to call them yadot. A yad is a handle. Now, if you just have a handle without the pot, you're missing something, right? You're missing the main thing. So the way the Bavli reads this, and this is very important to understand because the Yerushalmi and in all the Tana'itic material, there's no such reference to the word yad. There's no such understanding that this is something different. They seem to think this is just maybe examples of kinuyim, okay, what we just talked about. But the Bavli is going to understand this, and this is very important to understand the rest of our daf, as a yad. That this is a third category. There's neder, the actual language. There's kinui, which is a nickname, a similar word to neder. And then there's yad, which is, it's kind of cut off. You didn't say part of what you really wanted to say. You didn't say, you're forbidden to me, or this item is forbidden to me. You didn't say it clearly enough, called a yad, and yet it's going to still be effective. It's still going to be asur. Even cut off language, it's clear what you mean, and therefore it's going to be forbidden. And like I said, when we get to Daf Dalet, we'll see that Shmuel says it has to have some sort of combo of category 1 and category 2. Okay, by themselves, they don't actually mean anything. But again, the simple reading really seems like these are 5 different cases. Okay, so it's always important to differentiate between what the Gemara does to the Mishnah and what the possible simple reading of the Mishnah is before the Gemara comes in and explains it, because the Gemara's way might not be the only way, as I pointed out, right? The fact that the Bavli is so clear that these are called yadot, and it's a third category, and builds an entire sugya based on it, which is what we're going to learn today, it's not clear at all from the Yerushalmi. It doesn't appear there at all, and they didn't seem to read the Mishnah in that way. Menuda ani lecha. Last language for today, menuda is nidoi, excommunicated. You're excommunicated from me. Rabbi Akiva yachochech b'zeh lahachmir. Rabbi Akiva seemed to think that we should be stringent here. He wasn't sure how to treat this, because normally you don't, if I want to say your fruits are forbidden to me, I wouldn't usually use the language excommunicated. Excommunicated usually means excommunicated, something different. So the question is it the same? Is it like muruchakni, mufrashni? I'm separating, are you trying to say, I'm separating myself from you? And that excommunication includes, that's what excommunicating is, right? We're going to have no connection anymore. Or is it not? So obviously, by the fact that the Mishnah says Rabbi Akiva thought that we should be machmir here, stringent. First of all, we have to explain what does it mean to be stringent here. We'll get to that later in the Gemara. And we're going to see that the rabbis actually disagree with him and think that that's not a language of a vow and it actually wouldn't be forbidden. With that, we're going to get started on the Gemara on ABBA. Kol kinuyim nedarim kinederim. So that's what our Mishnah said. Quote from our Mishnah: any language that's similar to neder is going, right? Anything that comes in the category of kinui neder is going to be treated like a vow. Mishna gabe Nazir. Now they're jumping forward to Nazir, first chapter, first Mishnah. Okay, I even brought it on your sheet, the beginning. Kol kinuyim nizirut kinizirut. Any kinui of Nazir is like nizirut. Haomer aha harei ze Nazir. Okay, and now they start going into all these languages of what would be considered a kinui of Nazir. And what doesn't appear there? Kol kinuyim nedarim kinedarim. To which the Gemara asks, why there did it not mention all of them? It only mentioned Nazir. And why here did it mention all four? Okay, it's a very not atypical question, I would say, of the Gemara. Why is it atypical? Because it's talking about more literary analysis of our Mishnah. Why does this appear here? It doesn't appear there. It's a very typical type of question that usually the Sforaim, or they're called Stamayim, ask on the Gemara. Who are the Sforaim or Stamayim? And this is very common. The beginning of Masechtot often have long Savoraitic sugyot. Okay, they're sections. They're called Stamayim because they don't have names. Okay, the Gemara was written from 200 to 500, but between the years 500 and that's the Tukufara Emochaim. Shouldn't say the Gemara was written, but what we call, right, the tricky how to even word this. What's the Gemara time period, which is when the Amoraim lived, was 200 to 500. After that, right, that was all after the Mishnah was compiled by Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. Then 500 to 800, before the Tkufat Geonim starts, in between we have what's called the Sforaim or Stamayim. They're called Stamayim because they appear in the Gemara. What happened was they probably wrote notes in the side of the text, and those notes got incorporated into our text. That's why I was very careful when I said it. The Gemara, as we see it, was written from 200 to 800, really. It was compiled over time because sections got added later. And they're called either Sforaim, Lashon Sfara, thinking, or Stamayim because they often appear without a name. We don't have names of them. So this whole sugya, you'll notice there's no names of rabbis anywhere. Which usually in the Daf of Gemara, you have a lot of names of rabbis. This one said that, it's a discussion. So here, and it's different types of questions, because once the Amoraim time period is done, right, just like the Amoraim commented on the Mishnah, Sforaim comment often on different types of questions. In this case, it's more literary on the Mishnah, but often it's more taking things were said in the Gemara and kind of analyzing them, like Kechidami, like he said this, but what's the case? Could it be this? Could it be that? They ask a lot of rhetorical questions. In this case, they're looking at the Mishnah and comparing mishnayot and saying, wait a minute, there's a list of only one, and here we have a list of four. Now, the obvious answer to this question, you see that their style of answering was a little different than ours. If I asked you that question, what would you say? Well, Nedarim comes before Nazir. I don't know if you would say this, but I think it seems logical. Nedarim comes before Nazir. Nedarim is the beginning, so they mention all four. And then Nazir is one of the examples. There's no reason to go back and repeat all the four. We just did it in the previous Masechet. Whereas Nedarim is the first that's mentioning these issues, so therefore they mention them all. But that's not what the Gemara says. So the Gemara says, Mishum de neder ushvua ktive gabe, because neder and shvua are mentioned next to each other in the verse. That's the verse in Bamidbar, chapter 30 that we looked at before. Said, Ki dur neder lashem, if you take a vow to God, o hishava shvua, or you take an oath. Therefore, tane tartin, Therefore, they mention, once you're going to mention neder in that same mouthful, you're going to talk about shvuah. By the way, it's very interesting because shvuot, which is a Masechet all about oaths, comes up in nezikin. Okay, it's interesting it's not here. We'll get to that when we get to nezikin. Anyway, therefore, they wanted to at least mention shvuah next to neder. Came into Tani Tartan, Tani the Kulu. Once you were up to two, well, they already mentioned the other two that have the same halacha. To which the Gemara said, right, and then there's no reason to do it by Nazir because Nazir doesn't have that. To which the Gemara says, okay, well, if you're going to say that, if the whole thing is that neder and shvuah are next to them in the pasuk, then we have another structural problem with the Mishnah. Vilidi kinui shvuah batar nedarim. Why didn't you say then? Why is the order of the Mishnah neder, cherem, shvuot, nazir? It should be neder, shvuot, and then maybe cherem, nazir. So why didn't you put shvuah right next to nedarim, just like they're juxtaposed in the verse? To which the Gemara answers, I did tani nedarim, de mitzar chefze Allah, tani nami charamim de mitzar chefze Allah. This goes back to what I said in the intro, which is nedarim is what we call an isur chefze. The forbiddenness is on the object. So is cherem. That's why they go together. Where shvuah is on the person, and therefore it's different. By the way, this whole chefze gavra is the brisk way of study of Torah is of Gemara is to often put things into these categories of chefze gavra, right? And it's a very big thing. This is one of the places where the Gemara actually does it themselves. Okay, normally it's more commentary. Say, oh, let's try to distinguish. That's Yisro Chefza. This is Yisro Gavra. Here, the Gemara explicitly talks about it. So now they say, La shvuah is different because you're forbidding yourself to the object as opposed to the object to yourself. To which the Gemara asks now another question. So we started with a question of why is this whole long list? And then we said the whole list is because neder and shvuah, that's how it started. Then it got to the whole thing. Then why is it shvuah next to neder? Because cherem is more similar to neder. Now we say, again, I see, Adina, you're asking about the way we call cherem. What we call cherem today is not the same thing. Okay, it's not. This is a good example of language changing, the meaning of language changing. Now they ask another question. Patach kinuyim, kol kinuyim nedarim. Right, that was our topic sentence. And the next mission, as I told you, is going to start explaining what are types of kinuyim, what are examples of them. But then instead of explaining kinuyim, what does it immediately do? Umifaresh yadot. It starts explaining. Now, here's what I told you. To the Bavli, it's obvious there's this category called yadot, which again, isn't necessarily obvious to anyone, but to these rabbis, it was clear. This is called yadot, and it's very weird. It starts with kinuyim. It starts explaining yadot without actually calling them yadot, and then it starts to explain kinuyim. So they say, this whole thing doesn't make sense. It says, kol kinuyim nedarim, and then mefarish yadot. Hamer l'chaveron mudar ani mimcha. V'tu yadot inshe. And not only that, but the words yadot are missing from the Mishnah. Should have said kol yadot ki nedarim ki nedarim. Didn't say that. To which the Gemara says, Ayre bahon v'chisurim v'chasr v'achi katana. It's talking about yadot, and this is what and it's missing words. And this is how the Mishnah should read. Kol kinuyim nedarim ki nedarim v'yadot nedarim ki nedarim. Okay, so now it says it should say those words. They're just missing. What it really means to say, and this is the structure of the Mishnah, all kinuyim, names that are like nedarim, are treated like nedarim. And yadot, even if they're somewhat cut off and they're not complete statements, it's also treated like a vow. It has, right, again, what does that mean? It's effective, which means if you don't keep your word, you've gone against the Torah of not keeping your word. That's why it's such an amazing thing that our words can create isur, a prohibition. It's a fascinating thing in general. Right, that's what Rabbanit Sarna was referring to, about how our words have the power to create and create almost what God did, right? God created prohibitions, we can create our own prohibitions. Again, whether that's good or bad, it's all a separate thing, but it's actually effective. And even in the language of a yad. And then the Gemara says, wait, if you're going to say that it's missing the words, and then it reads, kol kinuyim kinuyim, yadot ki yadot, then it explains yadot, and then it goes back to explain kinuyim. It doesn't make any sense. V'lifush kinuyim bereisha. It should have then gone, right? Kinuyim ki kinuyim, yadot ki yadot. That's the title of the Mishnah. And then it should say, here's a list of kinuyim, here's a list of yadot. But instead it goes, here's a list of yadot, here's a list of kinuyim. This is what we call chiastic structure, or ABBA. So, well, that's the Gemara's answer. Hu desalik mina, Hahu mefarish bereisha. Where they left off, that's what they explained first. That's ABBA. We started with one, we moved to the other. Well, we're already in the other. Let's explain that one, and then let's go back. Best example, even though the Gemara doesn't bring this, the first Mishnah in the first few mishnayot of the Shas, Brachot. What does it start with? Then it says, right, when do we read Shema at night? Then it says, when do we read Shema in the morning? Then it says, the Berachot of Kriyat Shema in the morning are this, and then it says the Berachot of Kriyat Shema at night are this. And the Gemara asks, why do it in this order? And it says exactly this. And in fact, they're going to bring a bunch of examples, not from there, but they're going to bring a bunch of examples. Kidditna. 3 examples they're going to bring are in Mishnayot and Masechet Shabbat. Bameh madlikin ubameh ein madlikin. Ein madlikin lo b'lechesh, lo b'chosem, lo b'chalach. Right? What do you use for lighting candles and what can't you use on Shabbos? And then it starts to list all the oils you can't use. And only after that does it get to the oils you can use. Bameh tomnim ubameh ein tomnim. This is they would wrap their food completely in order to keep the heat in. What materials can you use to do it? It has to be a material that doesn't add heat. What materials can't you use? And again, it starts off with ein tomnim. So it says, what can you use? What can't you use? And then it starts off with, right, that's the topic sentence. And then it says, you can't use blah, 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 blah. And it eventually goes back to what you can. Bamei isha yotza, ubamei ina yotza. What can a woman wear on her body that will not be considered carrying? What can't she wear on her body that will be considered carrying? There's certain things that you might have on your body. If they're not considered clothing, then it's considered you're carrying them, and you're not allowed to do that. So again, it starts off with lo tetzei isha. So it started with how can you carry? What can you carry outside? What can't you? And then, right, this is in a place where there's no eruv and you're not allowed to walk outside carrying things. So, and then it starts with what you can't. So here's a whole bunch of mishnayot with ABBA structure, to which the Gemara says, now they're assuming that's always the way the Mishnah works, to which the Gemara says, wait, every time it starts with something, it never starts with that. In other words, the topic sentence starts with A, and then it moves to B. It never goes back to A in the beginning and then B. There's no structures like A, B, A, B. Of course there is. We're going to show you right now. The Hatnan, and now, again, this is the same type of thing. It can't be, they assume, that there's 2 different styles here, right? Now, the best reason to explain why there's 2 different styles is to say that Rabbi Akiva compiled the Mishnah. What does it mean he compiled the Mishnah? He didn't write it all. If he wrote it all, maybe he'd be consistent. Okay, even so, people who write, it takes you a long time to write. I remember when my husband Seth finished his doctorate, I edited it, and there were spellings of one thing in one place. And then, right, when you took the Hebrew, right, there's all these Hebrew words and you write them in English. So, he spelled them one way in a different place, right? You had to look through the entire thing and make sure there was consistency, because even people themselves aren't consistent always in their style. It's written over a period of time, especially, the more so. But let's just assume even Rabbi Akiva would be consistent. But he didn't write them. He collected mishnayot that people were reciting. So it could be style of one person was to do ABBA, style of another person was to do ABAB, and that would be a great answer. But it's not the type of answers that the Gemara gives. So the Gemara asks first. Let's go through the question, and then we'll see the answer the Gemara gives. The Hatznan, doesn't it say in a Mishnah, Yesh nochalim manchilim? We're going to have a whole bunch of mishnayot. This one's in Baba Batra, which talks about inheritance. There are those who inherit and pass on inheritance one to the other. So, for example, a father and son. If a father dies, the inheritance goes to the son. If a son dies, and the son doesn't have any children, the inheritance goes to the father. So it goes both ways. Nochalin velo manchilin. There are some people who inherit, like a son from a mother. But if the son dies, lo manchilin, the son will not pass on inheritance to the mother. The mother will not inherit the son. So therefore, there you have, okay, so there's some like this, some like that. Now notice it's not important, the content here. What's important is the structure. Then it starts with Elu nochalin umanchilin. It starts with the ones who were nochel umanchil. The first one, okay, it goes back to A. Yesh mutarot lebalehem. You might remember this from Yavamot. There are those who were permitted to their husbands. Va'asurot liyivmehem, but forbidden to the Yavam. For example, if she's a widow, she's allowed to marry her husband if he's a Kohen. But if his brother is a Kohen Gadol, when the husband dies without children, she can't do Yibum with the other husband because he's a Kohen Gadol, he's a high priest, he can't marry a widow. Then there's mutarot liyivmehen v'asurot lebalehen. But if her husband was the Kohen Gadol, she was forbidden to marry her husband, but if he dies without children, she can actually marry the brother because he's only a Kohen. A regular Kohen and a widow can marry a Kohen. And again, what's the structure? Elu mutarot lebalehen v'asurot liyivmehen, and it goes back to the first one. Yesh tu'unot shemen u'levona, shemen v'lo levona. Okay, there are those who need, there are mincha offerings, meal offerings that need shemen and levona, oil and frankincense. Okay, the meal offering was often offered. You mixed the dough with oil, and then when you put it on the altar, you burnt it with frankincense. There's some shemen below levona. Okay, by the way, all these have more options. I didn't go to all the options. Okay, but they all have 4 options. Okay, so there's some that was shemen and not levona. There's some without levona and yes, shemen. There's some without either. Okay, these are different types of meal offerings. Like for example, I'll just give you one of them without getting into all the details. Lechem apanim was brought with frankincense. It didn't have oil in it though. It was just flour and water. And the minchat choteh, for example, has nothing because you want to make it, if you sinned and you bring a mincha offering, that's or levi yored, you don't have enough money to afford an animal, so you bring or birds, so you bring a meal offering. It comes with nothing. It's very basic because you sinned, so you don't want to bring a fancy offering when you did something wrong. Ve'elu tu'unim shemen u'levona. Now notice it goes back to case number 1, shemen and levona example. Yesh tu'unot hagasha ve'ein tu'unot tnufa v'lo hagasha. There's certain sacrifices that says you're supposed to bring the mincha to the altar. And you bring it to one of the corners of the altar. That's called hagasha. Hanafa is when you wave it. Okay, a whole shaking of a lulav. Some people claim comes from the waving in the temple. Like for example, they would wave the bikurim. And you brought the bikurim to the Kohen, you would wave them. So there's some things that require bringing to the altar, some things that require waving, some things that require one and not the other, and some things that require neither. So that's that list. And again, what does it go back to? Ve'elu tu'unot hagasha, and it goes again, it's A, B, C, D, A, B, C, D. Yesh b'chor l'nachala ve'en b'chor l'kohen, b'chor l'kohen ve'en b'chor l'nachala. There's a firstborn for inheriting who doesn't necessarily need a pidyon ben. Would that be? If the mother, for example, right, had a C-section, right, goes by the mother, so he would be a firstborn he gets double, but not a firstborn for pidyon ben. Or, right, like let's say if for the mother, first of all, it's about Kohen or like that, or about Levi, or it could be he was a C-section. B'chor l'kohen ve'en b'chor l'nachala. Well, what if it's b'chor for the father, but not b'chor for the mother? Sorry, b'chor for the mother, but not b'chor for the father. Okay, so if it's the mother's first, you do a pidyon ben. If it's not the father's first, though, then he wouldn't get double. And it starts again with case 1. So there we have a long list of mishnayot. I wrote in the cheat sheet, you could see what Masechet mishnayot are from. Anyway, mishnayot where it's A, B, C, D, A, B, C, D. So now it doesn't make sense. Why ABBA and why ABAB? To which the Gemara says, halen, okay, 3 lines to the bottom, mishum de avshulim. Because there's a lot of options, it went back all the way to the beginning. It's confusing to A, B, C, D, D, C, B, A. Could be done, but right when it's ABBA, so right when it's 2 things, we do ABBA. When it's ABCD, we do ABCD, ABCD. Seems like a reasonable answer, but then the Gemara says that doesn't really work. And I'm going to leave you with a question today. What about this one? This is interesting because it's right opposite the parak. It's next to the parak of the B'mei Shayotza, which was ABBA, and this one is ABAB. Okay, in what can your animal is supposed to also not work on Shabbat. You're not supposed to put heavy loads on your animal. So what can you put on your animal? What can't you put on your animal? Again, considered more clothing for the animal, so to speak, would be allowed. Something that's a burden would not be allowed. And what does it say? Right there, it says, Delo Avsha, it's not a lot of things, it's just 2 options. Vikatane Yotze Gamal. And then it starts with Bameh Behema Yotza. Rather than ABBA, it does ABAB. So now we're left with a big question. I hope you managed to sleep tonight, wondering about why the structure is the way it is. Maybe you'll sleep because you at least saw my answer, even though it's not the Gemara's answer, right? Which is different styles. Anyway, that's it for our first daf of Nedarim. We will meet up tomorrow.